Arthur Blackwood, a name that commanded respect in every cattle market from the territories to the coast, looked like nothing more than a broken-down prospector who had found no gold. In the autumn of his years, with an empire of land and livestock vast enough to be its own sovereign state, a deep and unsettling cynicism had taken root in his heart. His children, with their soft hands and city manners, whispered that his compassion was a liability, that the world was a den of wolves where sheep were meant to be devoured. So, he had shed his fine coat and silver-buckled belt, trading them for frayed denim and worn leather, to see the wolves for himself. He pushed open the swinging doors of the Gilded Cactus, the only establishment in Redemption Gulch that boasted 2 stories. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer, fried meat, and quiet desperation. The owner, a portly man named Bartholomew Grimsby with a smile as slick as snake oil, was fawning over a table of land speculators, his laughter a booming, false thunder. Arthur's gaze swept over the room and landed on a young waitress, her movements weary but precise. He took a seat at a rickety table in the corner, the wood groaning under his weight. When she approached, he saw the deep exhaustion in her eyes, a story of hardship etched more plainly than his own disguise. To test the waters, to throw a stone and see the ripples, he ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, the ribeye steak. Grimsby, overhearing from the bar, let out a derisive snort. But the waitress, whose name he would later learn was Sarah May, simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Minutes later, she returned with the plate. As she set it down, her fingers brushed his, and he felt a small, folded piece of paper pressed into his palm. Her eyes darted nervously toward Grimsby before meeting his for a fleeting second, a silent plea and a warning all at once. Arthur waited until she was gone before unfolding the note under the table. The words, scrawled in hurried pencil, sent a jolt through his tired soul and brought his entire charade to a screeching halt. He stared at the 3 simple, powerful words written on the scrap of paper, "The meat is old." Beneath them, a 4th was added, almost as an afterthought, careful. A wave of something other than world-weary cynicism washed over him. It was a sharp, electrifying intrigue. A drifter, a man who by all appearances could barely afford such a meal, was not someone to protect. Protecting him was a risk, a gamble with her own precarious employment for no conceivable reward. Why? He looked down at the steak, a piece of meat swimming in a thick, dark gravy designed to conceal, not to complement. Using the edge of his fork, he pushed aside some of the sauce. The color of the meat was off, a dull, grayish tinge at the edges that bespoke a cut long past its prime. The smell, masked by onion and spice, was subtly, sickeningly sweet. She had told the truth, risking her livelihood for a complete stranger. His gaze found her again as she moved between tables, a phantom of quiet efficiency. He noticed the things a wealthy rancher, insulated by comfort, would normally miss. He saw the frayed stitching on her apron, the way her worn-out boots had been resoled so many times the leather was barely holding together. He watched as Grimsby barked an order at her, and the slight, almost imperceptible flinch she made, a movement of a creature long accustomed to the threat of a predator. While clearing another table, thinking no one was watching, she quickly palmed a leftover bread roll and slipped it into her apron pocket, a desperate act of survival that twisted something in Arthur's chest. The initial, detached experiment was over. This was no longer about proving a philosophical point to his distant children. His journey now had a face, a name he did not yet know, and a pair of exhausted eyes that held more integrity than he had seen in any boardroom. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not leave this town until he understood the story behind that note. Arthur decided to stay, securing a sparse room in the town's only boarding house, which he quickly discovered was also owned by the ubiquitous Bart Grimsby. He returned to his table at the Gilded Cactus and made a show of eating the steak, cutting it into small pieces and moving them around his plate to give the impression of a meal consumed. When he was finished, he left a single silver coin on the table. It was far too much for a drifter to leave as a tip, but not so much as to expose his true station. It was a test of a different kind. He watched from the shadows of the street through the saloon's grimy window. He saw Sarah May approach the table, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the coin. A flicker of relief, of gratitude, crossed her face before it was replaced by a familiar mask of weary caution. Before her fingers could even touch it, Grimsby materialized at her side. With a sneer, he swept the coin into his own waistcoat pocket, muttering something that made her shoulders slump in defeat. Arthur felt a cold anger settle in his gut. This was not business, it was predation. The man was not just an owner, but a parasite, feeding on the desperation of those he employed. The following day, Arthur walked the dusty streets of Redemption Gulch, his ears open. He spoke to the blacksmith, the stable hand, the grocer. The name Grimsby was on everyone's lips, spoken in hushed tones of fear and resentment. He owned the mortgage on the smithy, held the debt for the general store, and controlled the flow of goods into the town. He was a spider at the center of a web, and everyone was caught. It was the stable hand who gave him the final piece of the puzzle. He spoke of Sarah May, a good woman trapped by circumstance. Her younger brother, Thomas, was gravely ill with a lung fever, and the expensive medicine he needed came through Grimsby's store, at a price Grimsby himself set. She was working not for a wage, but to pay off an ever-increasing debt, a form of modern-day servitude from which there was no escape. That evening, Arthur returned to the saloon. The air felt heavier now, charged with the knowledge of the invisible chains that bound the people within it. He sat at the same table, the wood feeling less like a perch for observation and more like a pew in a chapel of sorrows. He ordered a simple bowl of stew, not as a test, but because he needed to see her again, to affirm the strength he had glimpsed. When Sarah May brought the bowl, their eyes met. There was no need for words. In her gaze, he saw a flicker of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the coin and the warning. He saw her register him not just as a customer, but as a witness. He broke the silence, his voice a low rumble. "It's a long road I've been on," he said, the words true in more ways than one. "A kind face is a welcome sight." A small, sad smile touched her lips for a moment. "Kindness doesn't pay for medicine, mister," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, before her training kicked in and she turned to leave. But the brief exchange had not gone unnoticed. Grimsby, ever watchful, stomped over to the table. "What are you bothering the customers for, girl?" he boomed, his voice dripping with venomous authority. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her thin sleeve. "Get back to work. We don't pay you to socialize with vagrants and dust drifters." The public humiliation was a physical blow. Color flooded Sarah May's cheeks, and she shrank into herself, pulling her arm away and scurrying back toward the kitchen. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, their eyes fixed on their plates, cowed into silence. But Arthur did not look away. He stared directly at Grimsby, and the gentle, world-weary traveler vanished. In his place was the founder of the Blackwood Cattle Empire, a man who had faced down rustlers, politicians, and the unforgiving wilderness itself. A cold, dangerous fury, an emotion he had not felt in decades, began to smolder within him. This was no longer an investigation, it was a reckoning. The smoldering fury in Arthur's soul demanded action. He needed more than whispers and town gossip, he needed proof, a weapon to dismantle the rotten empire Grimsby had built on the backs of the desperate. After the last drunkard had been ejected into the night and the lamps of the gilded cactus were extinguished, Arthur found a vantage point in the deep shadows of the alley across the street. He didn't have to wait long. A rickety cart, its wheels muffled with rags, pulled up behind the saloon. A shifty-eyed man climbed down and was met at the back door by Grimsby himself. Huddled in the faint moonlight, they conducted their business. Arthur watched as crates of whiskey, their seals clearly broken, were exchanged for a small pouch of coins. He saw Grimsby inspect a side of beef, its surface unnaturally dark, and haggle the price down with a greedy smirk. This was the source of the poison, the spoiled meat and watered-down liquor he served to his customers. He was cheating the entire town, profiting from potential sickness and certain deception. But it was the conversation he overheard next that turned his cold anger into glacial resolve. The supplier asked Grimsby about his waitress. "That girl." Grimsby chuckled, a horrid, gurgling sound. "She's not going anywhere. Her brother's fever flared up again. I added the cost of the new medicine to her tab, plus interest, of course. A little fee for special ordering it." He laughed again. "She'll be working for me until she's old and grey, and she'll still owe me. She knows if she ever tries to leave, the medicine stops coming." I own her, body and soul. The casual cruelty, the sheer, unadulterated evil of the man's words, struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. He had set out to find the wolves of the world, and he had found their king, preening on a throne built of suffering. He now understood the depth of Sarah May's courage. Her note was not just a warning to a stranger, it was an act of rebellion, a desperate cry for justice in a world that had offered her none. Arthur slipped away from the alley, the vile conversation echoing in his mind. He returned to his boarding house room, the space feeling more like a prison cell than a sanctuary. He looked at his own calloused hands, hands that had built an empire from nothing, and felt a profound sense of shame. What was the point of his fortune, of the power his name wielded, if it lay dormant while men like Grimsby feasted on the innocent? His cynicism had been a shield, an excuse for inaction, a comfortable blanket of disillusionment. But Grimsby's cruelty had ripped it away, exposing the raw nerve of his own long-buried conscience. This was the test he had unknowingly been seeking, not for the world, but for himself. He could no longer be a passive observer. He walked to the town's telegraph office just before it closed, the single lamp casting a lonely glow. He handed a message to the sleepy operator, a coded series of instructions addressed to a man in the next territory. The message was for Marcus Thorne, his foreman, a man of unwavering loyalty and formidable presence, whose quiet authority could quell a cattle stampede or a barroom brawl with a single look. The telegram was simple: bring the lawyer. Trouble in Redemption Gulch. A wolf is killing the sheep. He knew Marcus would understand the urgency and the implication. The plan began to form in his mind, sharp and clear. This would not be a quiet intervention. Grimsby's power was built on public perception and fear. Therefore, his downfall had to be a public spectacle. He had to be dismantled piece by piece in front of the very people he had terrorized, so they could see that the monster was, in fact, just a man, and that justice, though it may travel a long and dusty road, eventually arrives. Arthur Blackwood, the drifter, would be the catalyst, but Arthur Blackwood, the rancher, would deliver the final, decisive blow. He would let Grimsby believe he was nothing, a speck of dust to be swept away, right up until the moment the world came crashing down around him. The next day dawned with a palpable tension in the air, as if the land itself knew a storm was on the horizon. Arthur spent the morning in quiet observation, watching the rhythm of the town, the downcast eyes of its citizens, the swaggering confidence of Grimsby as he collected his dues. He saw Sarah May scrubbing the saloon's front steps, her knuckles raw, her face a pale mask of despair. He had learned from the grocer that Grimsby had, as promised, raised the price on her brother's medicine again that morning, pushing her ever deeper into the abyss of his debt. Her quiet act of rebellion had cost her dearly, and she had no idea that her small act of kindness was about to be repaid 1,000-fold. As the sun reached its zenith, the saloon began to fill for the midday meal. This was the moment. Arthur took a deep breath, straightened his tired shoulders, and pushed through the swinging doors for the last time as a nobody. He walked not to his usual corner table, but to the very center of the room. The floorboards creaked under his boots, and every eye turned to the dusty old man who stood as if he owned the place. He let the silence stretch, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the cowed townsfolk before finally landing, like a hawk on its prey, on Bart Grimsby behind the bar. Grimsby. Arthur's voice was not the gravelly murmur of a drifter, but a clear, resonant command that cut through the smoky air. "You're a poisoner and a thief!" A collective gasp went through the room. Grimsby's face, initially contorted in disbelief, darkened with rage. "What did you say, old man?" he snarled. "I said," Arthur repeated, his voice rising in volume and authority, "that you serve rotten meat and watered-down whiskey to your customers. You build your fortune on deception and the sickness of others." Grimsby laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. "You're insane. I've had enough of you." He gestured to two large, brutish men who served as his muscle. "Boys, throw this delusional old fool out into the street where he belongs." Just as Grimsby's thugs took a menacing step forward, the saloon doors swung open with such force that they banged against the interior walls, silencing the room in an instant. Standing silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun was a tall, imposing figure. It was Marcus Thorne, his duster failing to conceal the powerful frame of a man who wrestled nature for a living. His face was granite, and his eyes, cold and sharp, scanned the room before locking onto Arthur. Behind him, the The town sheriff, looking deeply uncomfortable, and a man in a fine city suit carrying a leather briefcase, followed him in. The thugs froze mid-stride. Marcus took 2 steps into the room, his boots thudding on the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. He ignored Grimsby completely. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus's voice was a low, respectful baritone that filled the saloon. "We came as fast as we could." The name hung in the air, electric and unbelievable. "Mr. Blackwood." The patrons whispered the name, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and the vast cattle empire that was the lifeblood of the entire territory. Grimsby's jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. He stared at the dusty drifter, the vagrant, and for the first time, he truly saw the man before him. Arthur slowly removed his worn, sweat-stained hat, revealing the sharp, intelligent eyes and the unmistakable countenance of a commander. He was no longer Art the Drifter, he was Arthur Blackwood, and he had come for a reckoning. The lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase. "Bartholomew Grimsby," the lawyer's voice was crisp and devoid of emotion, "I have here a signed confession from your supplier detailing your fraudulent purchases. I also have a warrant from the territorial judge to audit your books, which show a clear pattern of extortion and racketeering. The sheriff is here to take you into custody." Grimsby sputtered, his bravado utterly shattered. He looked from the lawyer's emotionless face to the sheriff's reluctant determination, and finally to the cold, unforgiving eyes of Arthur Blackwood. "It's a lie. A trick. You can't. He's a drifter," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. But the evidence was absolute, the trap sprung with lethal precision. The sheriff, emboldened by the presence of Blackwood's formidable entourage, stepped forward and clamped a hand on Grimsby's shoulder. The fight went out of the man completely, and he sagged like a puppet with its strings cut. As the sheriff led the disgraced saloon owner away, a stunned silence held the room captive. The people of Redemption Gulch, so used to Grimsby's tyranny, were watching the impossible unfold. Arthur's gaze moved past the astonished faces and found Sarah May. She was standing by the kitchen door, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The drifter she had tried to protect, the old man she had pitied, was the most powerful man she had ever seen. Arthur walked toward her, his steps measured and gentle. The entire saloon watched as the titan of industry approached the penniless waitress. He stopped before her, his expression softening. "Your note," he said, his voice now quiet and kind. That small act of courage, of integrity. It was the spark that started a fire, Sarah May. You warned a stranger at great risk to yourself. You showed me that decency wasn't dead, just hiding in the shadows. He then turned to address the entire room. "I am purchasing this saloon, the boarding house, and every outstanding debt held by Mr. Grimsby in this town. All debts are hereby forgiven." A wave of murmurs and gasps swept through the crowd. He turned back to Sarah May. "And an establishment like this needs a proper manager. Someone with integrity. The position is yours, if you'll have it. With a fair wage, a share of the profits, and a guarantee that your brother will receive the finest medical care in the territory." Starting today, tears streamed down Sarah May's face, washing away the years of fear and exhaustion, as she could only nod, unable to speak. 6 months later, the wind that blew through Redemption Gulch no longer carried whispers of desperation, but the sounds of laughter and commerce. The gilded cactus was gone. In its place stood Sarah May's place, the wooden sign above the door carved in elegant script. Inside, the air was clean, filled with the aroma of honest food and the warm chatter of a town reborn. The tables were sturdy, the floors were clean, and the whiskey was pure. Sarah May moved through the room not with the haunted shuffle of a servant, but with the confident grace of a proprietor. She was the heart of the establishment, and her kindness radiated outwards, touching everyone who entered. Her brother, Thomas, now healthy and strong, helped by clearing tables, his laughter the brightest sound in the room. The worn-out boots that had once been a symbol of her struggle were gone, replaced by a pair of sturdy, well-made leather boots, a gift from a friend. At a corner table, the same one where he had sat as a drifter, sat Arthur Blackwood. He was dressed in his own clothes now, a man comfortable in his own skin, his face no longer clouded by cynicism but warmed by a gentle contentment. He watched Sarah May manage her staff with a firm but fair hand, and he saw the profound truth he had traveled so far to find. He had set out to weigh the soul of the world and found it wanting, only to discover that true worth was not measured in gold, or land, or heads of cattle. It was measured in small, courageous acts of kindness, in the integrity of a single person willing to stand against the dark. His journey had not just saved a town, it had saved him from himself, restoring his faith in the simple, powerful goodness of the human heart. If this story of courage and kindness restoring faith in a cynical world touched your heart, show your support by liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that even the smallest act of integrity can change everything. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for more inspirational stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. We believe that stories can illuminate the best in all of us, and your engagement helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. What did Sarah May's act of courage mean to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is a vital part of our community, and we read every single one. Thank you for watching, and for being a part of a community that values compassion and believes in the power of a single, righteous spark to light up the world. Until next time, remember that your character is your greatest wealth, and your kindness is your most powerful legacy.